Welcome. Today, we're here to really think about the role of women in the workforce and all the tremendous things that we can contribute. We have International Women's Day coming up, and we just know that there's so many different obstacles and unique things that we bring to the workforce. So today, I'm joined by women from the LeadWell Collective who are all passionate around what our role is and how we're developing and shaping the workforce. Mila, let's kick it off with you. Can you give us a bit of an introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's MiljaSaari-Hembruff. I'm a long time, I'd say 25-year plus veteran of working in large corporate environments, and recently launched a company called the LeadWell Collective together with Melissa. And we're just really excited about talking about a lot of leadership development and just talent development topics, especially focused on women.
All right, Melissa, as the co-founder here with the LeadWell Collective.
Thank you. As Amelia said, I'm one of the co-founders of the LeadWell Collective. I've spent my career in tech, starting off in little startups, all the way up to large global organizations. And recently, we started the LeadWell Collective, just really built on the notion that we believe that we need better leaders in the tech industry, and empowering women is one of the ways that we do that.
Wonderful. And Mary, an advocate for women at all points in their career.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mary Gramaglia. I'm a friend of Amelia, Melissa, and Katie, former colleague as well, who I had a long career in tech as well as other industries. And I do feel strongly about mentoring young women and mid-career women and being able to share my experience and thoughts with them. I wish that I knew, then what hopefully we can impart to them now. So yeah, feel strongly about the topic.
That's absolutely what we're here to talk about today. So let's kick it off with just talking about what's top of mind as we think about International Women's Day and topics that are really important to talk about. What's the first thing that's coming to mind to you?
Yeah, I can kick us off. So like I said, we're a little bit on a mission to help build and empower great leadership in tech, but I think we could all agree that we need it right across right across the board. And so for me, great leadership is really rooted in both personal and organizational values. And it's been difficult to watch the kind of the accelerated turn away from values that aren't anchored in anything other than how do we increase shareholder value. So to help kind of explain the role that values play, I really think of them as kind of the energetic drivers for both, again, people and organizations, but really the foundation of our identity. And they become a framework for decision making that considers that broader perspective beyond like, will this make money? And I think that this is something that we really desperately need. We need to be thinking about the greater good.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'll add, from my point of view, especially at International Women's Day, one of the things I feel is super important to talk about right now from a leadership perspective and from a woman perspective is the topic of confidence. And I think we'll get into that a little more deeply today. But there's so much discussion about women and confidence and where are the gaps and the challenges and how can we make women more confident to grow in their careers. And I think even more important than that is actually looking at the environment that we're working in, and if our workplaces are really focused on building confidence by giving people, visibility and support and opportunity, or if we're creating these environments where we're actually kind of degrading, that confidence and taking it away. So I think confidence and the environment that we kind of create as leaders is really top of mind for me at the moment.
Yeah, and then I think it also just makes good business sense, right? Women have a great deal of talent. And as a business leader, one should want to exploit and maximize the talent of both your employee base as well as your customer base, right? So I just think that because it is the right thing to do from a humanistic, from a moral point of view, but it also just makes good business sense. So the challenge that I'm struggling with is why are we turning away from that, right? On this critical day, why all of a sudden are DEI initiatives viewed as being something we should be accelerating towards them, not taking that step back. And that's something that I find actually quite troubling as we are on the cusp of International Women's Day this year.
Well, as someone who's been a hiring manager as
Mm.
many of us here have been,
Mm.
every time I looked at hiring for my team, I was looking at what are the things that we need. There's different levers that you need to be pulling, and that diversity of talent really builds a better team. There's times I
Right.
need someone who's more technical, someone who had just that special sauce of how they connected with customers, and being able to bring those together really created a much more cohesive team.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Mila, you had talked about confidence. Let's dive in a little bit into that. Why do we feel like it's maybe treated as a personal shortcoming? If I think about my own career early on, I feel like I had a little too much confidence and needed to learn a few more lessons before I was really arriving at that. And then there's points where I've, faced imposter syndrome of, why am I in this room? What am I doing? How do we kind of navigate that? What are some of the suggestions that you have?
Yeah, so just a few thoughts maybe on that. So I think that women, especially as leaders, often have this double standard that we're facing. So sometimes we want to do one thing, but we're perceived as doing too much or being too aggressive or whatever. But if you do the opposite thing, then it's not enough. And so there's never the ability to reach this like perfect level. And I hate the term perfect. In fact, I have this t-shirt that I got at a conference a few years ago that says perfection is boring. And I used to wear it all the time whenever I gave any talks, because I think when it comes to the topic of like confidence, we have this like, I don't know, mentality that we need to just get it right. And we need to balance between not being too much and not being too little. And how do you get that right? And I think that confidence is, but I guess the goal of perfectionism related to confidence gets baked into us really early in our lives. We're taught to do certain things and to act certain ways. And I think some of those things we need to kind of undo, especially as it comes to, just addressing this perception of confidence in the workplace. So I think that there are a lot of biases in the workplace, and there are maybe perceived ways that we can advance and grow in our careers that actually aren't real or accurate. And when we perceive something that doesn't go the way that we want, then it kind of chips away at our confidence over time. So I don't know. That's just a couple of my high level thoughts. But Melissa, I'm sure you probably have more to add on that as well.
Yeah. So those gaps in confidence are often framed as personal shortcomings, right? So when you feel that like, ugh, I'm not enough in some way, it's like, what's wrong with me? And what really strikes me is that, we talk to, just in the course of our work, right? We talk to women right across the spectrum, right? Right from sort of the folks that are just starting their careers to people that are, much later career, maybe looking to pivot into something in the last, 5 or 10 years or so, right across industries. When we work mainly in tech, but conversations just naturally flow all over. Lack of confidence is something that impacts everybody all the time throughout their career, no matter where they are. And so I think it's at some point I really started to think about this, like, where is this really coming from? And I think it's not us, right? Like there's something that's sort of creating the conditions of this. So I think there's so many sort of societal and cultural conditioning that that happens, that tells us that we're supposed to be something other than who we are, that we don't belong, that we're not enough, like whatever that is. That's an external thing that's speaking to us. I tend to think about, especially in the last few years, really think about the systems that we operate in. And I don't think that the systems that we operate in support women very well, right? And that we're really starting to bump up against that. And I think we're seeing a lot more awareness of women saying like, wait a minute, like this isn't right. This wasn't designed for me. Workplace dynamics that value certain characteristics over others, like being, very certain and decisive over being curious about something, right? And these things start to get reinforced, that there's a problem with us because we are naturally more one way than the other. I think too, we maybe mistake lack of confidence with something like fear that is coming from some sort of, it can be coming from lots of places, but fear is a very natural emotion that all of us women, men, like regardless of where we are, occurs. It's just kind of like how we deal with it. So it's normal to feel afraid about standing up in front of a room of 200 people to say something. It's kind of like what you do with it that makes a difference. So there's a bit of a reframe, I think, that we can also take there. And then something that's always really helped me too is, again, getting back to that values piece, is when you get clear on your values and who you are, I do think it gives you a bit of a rooting in your identity that can become a foundation that you can, use and kind of grow upon. And that can certainly help. Mary, do you have any more thoughts?
Yeah, you mentioned the word fear, and I'm sure you guys have heard the study that shows that little girls start out equal to little boys in lack of and being fearless, right? And then about the time they hit around 9 or 10, so those sort of pre-teen years, girls start to pull back, right? And this sort of joyful, uninhibited, fearless approach that little girls will take to sports and everything else that they throw themselves into starts getting pulled back, right? And again, I think that to your point, it's a societal adaptation, societal requirements, so say expectations, right? Where girls start, taking on these more, I don't hesitate to say traditional roles, but girls start, I think, throttling back on some of that nascent confidence, right? And then I think that, and then to your point, now girls often feel they have to have all the answers before they speak up, or right? They're afraid of failing, right? What does failure even look like, right? Or not looking right. And so I think that society and companies, by extension, don't encourage the ability or the confidence of young women to take those risks, whereas young boys are always expected to take risks, right? And young girls and women are equally able to take that risk, right? But they need to be given their permission, the understanding permission to take that risk. You see what I'm saying? It's almost like an additional, I don't want to say push, but perhaps a little bit more encouragement. And I don't think that systems are set up, right, to acknowledge, right, the additional baggage that young women bring to the table. And I think that's to everybody's detriment when that acknowledgement is not. It's like trying to run a race when you're carrying an additional backpack with 30 pounds of additional societal stuff on top of you. And I think that starts out at a very young age. And I think that that's what we're all laboring against, decades later.
So as we think about, walking into a situation where I don't feel confident, I don't feel prepared, I, don't feel equipped enough to apply for the role or whatever that might be, whether I'm an individual contributor or as a leader, what kind of perspectives or simple tips would we have to suggest that you could do? Let's say I'm walking into a meeting and I don't feel like I deserve a seat there, or that I should speak up, or, I shouldn't apply for the job. Individual contributor first. Let's talk about what can we do, simple cheat sheet to solve for that.
So I can start. So I think that confidence is not just like one thing, right? It's a bit of a complex construct, and helping to kind of deconstruct it a little and figure out where it's coming from can be helpful. So lack of confidence can come from many things. So it could be a mindset thing, right? So we talk about having a growth mindset, which I think, everyone agrees is an important thing, but that could look like I suck at public speaking, right? I'm just not good at this. That's sort of a very set mindset. Whereas if you flip it and be like, okay, well, I'm learning to be a public speaker, right? And it's okay that it's not, getting back to Milja's comment about perfection, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to do this and I'll get better next time, and just kind of realizing it that you need to be willing to push past that initial reluctance or unwillingness and allow yourself the ability to grow. It could be a competence thing, right? Competency is based in skills, and skills can be, again, grown and mastered over time. So it could just be you got to put in the reps and keep working on it. Again, this thing of fear, right? What am I having the awareness to think, okay, this is fear. There's fear here. What's this based on? Is it I'm afraid of failing, which maybe you do need to do some work on your perfectionism thing, right? Because failure can be like the greatest gift.
Learning opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. I'm afraid of taking a risk, right? Back to Mary's points about where does that come from? Am I afraid of being judged? Well, who cares? Like, you still have to keep pushing yourself a little bit. negative self-talk is a big thing, right? And I think those seeds get planted very early on. So what is that voice telling me? Where did it come from? What limiting beliefs do I have? And how do I get past that? And there's so many great resources. You can visualizations or listening to audio. Like there's so many things that you can do to kind of help quiet that voice that's telling you that, you don't have what it takes to do the task at hand. And then also I think just expression, right? So how do you bring your message forward? It could be rooted in communication skills and getting outside of our comfort zone a little bit. So I think if you take a step back and kind of break it down, like where is this coming from? Get to the root of what's really, scaring you or messing with your confidence, and then thinking about what you can do to kind of put the things in place and kind of letting go of that. I need to be perfect. I am too afraid to even try, right? Which is what ultimately shuts us down.
Yeah, I have some maybe suggestions or tips, but from a leader's perspective. And I think too
Great.
often we put the burden on the individual, right? So in my past role, just not too long ago, I ran a team of 18 early talents. They were all people straight out of university or maybe within the first 3 to 5 years of starting their career. And I think as a leader, it's our job to demonstrate how to have confidence, to give people the opportunity to develop their confidence, and not just to kind of hope that it happens magically or that they even recognize that they can develop it, but it's the role of the leader as well to take some responsibility, to teach people how to ask questions, how to feel confident in a room, how to share their ideas, how to seek feedback on their ideas. And the leader really just needs to provide that forum, that environment where people can build confidence through repetition and not expect them to kind of have that perfection, to already know how to be confident in their job when they're straight out of school and, it's their 3 months on the job, right? It's our job as leaders to actually help foster that and build the environment that sustains it.
Well, something that I actually do as a practice is I always kind of, if I find something that's great, that's happening, I want to amplify that voice. Lots of times people aren't great about advocating for themselves. So reaching out and be like, hey, have you heard about this? I'd love to connect you with this person. I think you should see what they're doing. Sending a shout out to their boss or someone above them, copying them on that so they can see that kind of recognition and start to grow in confidence by seeing people around them in leadership positions supporting them.
Yeah, I think also as an individual, people need to be reassured that often confidence, other people don't necessarily perceive that you're not confident, right? And many times, we've all talked to, right? You talked to senior executives that gave a presentation. You're like, wow, that was great. Like, really? Because I didn't feel prepared, or or my slide where wasn't there, or, all these things fell apart, right? I didn't get any sleep last night. So oftentimes, they talk about faking it until you make it. I don't mean it that way, but it's sort of a trite expression. But lots of times, people who are more experienced are better at projecting confidence simply because they have more experience, right? So I think when you're coming into your point, Millie, about the younger people, right, giving them the supportive environment, but also as a part of that, helping them realize that confidence will come over time. And even though people may appear to be confident, they're often not. Okay, so it's not a circumvention event. So in other words, don't worry about it too much, right? Sometimes we worry a lot about how we're coming across and this and that. Sometimes you just have to jump into the deep end and not overthink things. And I think as women, we tend to sometimes overthink things, and you think you didn't do it, and nobody else noticed whatever flaw you thought you were projecting, right? They just saw someone who was confident, right? So I think that encouraging them to realize that, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Sometimes I would do is like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And many times it's like nothing, right? I mean, we've all seen senior executives that gave presentations that were like, you know what I mean? They just move on to the next one. They don't tend to, we also tend to dwell on things. Like, don't dwell. Men don't dwell. They just move on. Women dwell, right? So, but yeah, confidence comes over time. But we need more supportive environments to help people get there.
So, when we're a leader, Mila, you brought that up. We, have the opportunity with really the environment that we're creating with our team. I remember when I first took on leadership going through, different training around psychological safety and some of the things that we can be doing to really foster a great team. What are some of the things that you see that leaders are doing that is great to help really foster building confidence, not only in early talent, but really at any stage across the careers of the people we're working with?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that we can do to build confidence, and a lot of it, like I said before, and the part where I get very excited about it is around improving the environment where people feel confident, feel safe. Like you talked about psychological safety, we need places where we're very comfortable and where we're fostering that confidence. So I would say being an inclusive leader, meaning creating a place where every single voice is welcome to be heard, where everyone has airtime, and where people have their back. Like you were just saying in your example, giving that shout out. I think this is one of the things that I try to do as much as possible. And I don't think we think about it enough, but moderating meetings, having as a leader, being sure that when you're on a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting, that everyone in that room at that table is heard. It just happens so often that one or two or maybe three voices out of perhaps 10 in a call are the ones speaking all the time. I make it my personal mission to make sure that everyone is asked for input. If I had a side conversation with someone or saw an email, that I'll bring that in and raise it up and say, Katie, I recall last week you had a really great point. Can you repeat that for us and share it with the team? Just things like that where everyone is kind of raised up to have that opportunity to talk. And I think those small actions make a big difference. Making sure people speak, naming those contributions. If someone interrupts or talks over you, it happens all the time, let's be honest, challenging that interruption and saying, hang on a second, let's not derail, let's bring it back to what Katie was saying. Not letting people dominate the conversation. Those are some very kind of practical things that I try to use all the time to build that kind of inclusive environment.
So maybe I'll just build on that a little bit. I really think that as leaders, it is fundamental responsibility to create psychologically safe environments where all voices aren't only welcome, but are encouraged and drawn out, because not everybody has that, some people are more introverted, or, they may not naturally, come forward as other voices, as Milja said, right? So I think this looks like, really creating and then protecting an environment of mutual trust and respect. And I think having absolutely zero tolerance for when that's broken. Like it's not enough to just sort of let things slide or to, maybe pull somebody to the side. Like I think you really need to, in the meeting, in the moment, call it out if it appears and shut it down, because these things can kind of fester a little bit. People need to feel completely comfortable being themselves so that they can share their ideas, their concerns, their questions. They're fine with their half-formed ideas. I know for me personally, some of the best outcomes have come from those kind of like, I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall. Like knowing that this isn't a fully formed idea, but it kind of gets people, kind of riffing and creating together. So it has to be okay to have those imperfect thoughts out there on the table. And then making it okay to speak truth to power. So as a leader, I want people that are willing to, challenge, misguided or, God forbid, like unethical leadership to really drive change, and to check authority, right? They need to be able to say like, hey, this wasn't okay. And we should all want that, because that's how we get better together collectively. It feels a little bit like we're at a moment in culturally where that's getting harder and harder to do. But again, I think that that's something that good leaders really need to draw out and protect. And then again, I think, as leaders, we have to be ruthlessly self-aware and really insist on, helping, asking others to help us see what our blind spots are, and be really intentional about like who's getting visibility, who's getting the stretch work, and where the sponsorship is going, because it might, without any, bad intent, might be flowing to just certain people that are just, more naturally seeking it out. I think when leaders are very intentional about creating safe and inclusive places, then confidence stops being something that we have to manufacture.
The other things I found helpful in the past is you talk about, creating a safe space, a psychological safe space, and intentionally modeling the behavior you want. But I also think that leaders can disarm sort of negative thoughts by showing signs of vulnerability. By that I mean being open to and sharing. You mentioned, Melissa, if there's an observation of a behavior you don't think is, let's say, executive behavior or behavior that's not appropriate, right? To be able to talk about that, or to also share as a leader, to share concerns that you may have, right, about something that's happening, right? Because sometimes leaders are expected to simply parrot, what's going on, and just the information flows downhill, right? There's corporate talking points, and many times your employees don't need to hear the corporate talking points. Yes, you need to unpack it for them, right? And I think that when you show, and vulnerability may be a little bit of a strong word here, but when you show the self-awareness, when you yourself admit to not having all the answers, right? Admit to concerns about things, and sort of show that you are trusting your team by sharing, right, your thoughts that may go beyond corporate talking points. I think that creates a psychological space where your employees may feel very open about wanting to confide in you, right? Wanting to share because you in turn confiding in them. So I think that trust factor also helps a lot. But I do think that while vulnerability may be a strong word a little bit, but I do think that creating that space also means sharing with you parts that we may not traditionally have been taught to do. And I think that's where women really excel, because then we start getting that idea of like empathy and stuff, where women really have that in spades, and there's been sometimes an unappreciated quality that we have.
Well, when I think about creating that environment where it's safe to take risks and people can feel like they're thriving, it's one of the things I've seen as a leader is sometimes you need to weigh that not everybody's going to want to speak up in a big group. We have a lot of different type of personalities. I've led people who are much more quiet voice that had great ideas. So that needs to be something they shared one-on-one that I might help amplify and bring up in a meeting to help give them a platform. Or, it was me volunteering to, hey, I'm happy to be the bad guy for you on this. Thanks for sharing this with me. Let me go lead the charge on this. Let me take the hit for this so you can be a partner, and looking at ways that you as a leader help to lead with that confidence to make it easier for your team. As we look at what the LeadWell Collective does, you're very much focused on how do we drive growth. What are some of the lessons that each of you have across your career that you wish you would have learned earlier?
Okay, so I'll take this one first. And I think my lesson kind of blends my own confidence both at work and outside of work, which of course we are all whole people. We're not different people at work and at home. But it was a period in my career where I doubted myself, and I actually was almost two different people. I was a one person at home and I was a different person at work. I kind of doubted my ability to advance my career and grow into kind of a leadership role because I was waiting for someone to recognize that, hey, she's doing it. She's working hard. Her head's been down. She's like delivering. That's amazing. Let's promote her. And I didn't really realize at the time that heads down is not really the strategy that would work for me. And also at the time, I didn't have a very supportive life partner. So that kind of, when you talk about, Mary, the trust factor, I didn't have the trust in myself, not other people having trust in me, because I think they did, but I didn't have the trust in myself that I could grow into what I wanted to be. So I stayed at the same kind of career level way, way, way longer than I ever should have, just because I didn't trust myself, my instincts. I didn't trust my peers who were telling me, you could do this, you could advance, you could do whatever. But once I had a sponsor who really stood up for me, and I was like, wait a second, okay, I can do this. I started to trust my gut. I listened to people and colleagues. I took bigger opportunities. I was put up for those bigger roles, and then I skyrocketed it. But it was all very much, like you said, Mary, based on that trust factor in myself. So it's kind of a balance between the confidence and that kind of trusting environment that I could grow myself in.
Yeah, so similar themes, right? Trust in yourself and confidence in what you can do and can achieve. I feel like I knew several years before I left a corporate role that I wasn't really meant to be there anymore. And I think that it was just getting back to that values alignment, right? There was something there that was not in alignment for me, but the kind of the idea or the confidence to break into something completely different and try something completely different just wasn't there. It took me a little while to kind of realize that I could do something completely different. And that's, now Milja and I have started this company, LeadWell, and that really came from getting to a point where I could believe that I could do something that wasn't tied to somebody else's framework, right? That I could really kind of write my own rules. And I had to have this sort of the trust in my own vision and know that I could figure it out, that I didn't have to work within this box that didn't feel right to me anymore. Again, coming back to that discussion around perfectionism, right? I needed to learn that I could move forward without having all of the answers and kind of like the perfect wrapped up solution of what this was going to look like, and just be sort of comfortable with not knowing what was going to happen, and just trusting that I had the ability to bring it together and to create something really meaningful for myself. So starting this company has taught me that, confidence sometimes is really just built by acting, right? Like just taking that next right step and just being willing to kind of like step out onto the lake, so to speak. But there's no sharks under couple sharks maybe, but just we're never really ready. So just take the step.
So one of the things that I realize is that sometimes you will find allies in very unexpected places, and to be cognizant of that, sometimes the people you expect to be your best allies will not be your best allies, and other people will come to you. So you just need to be aware and prepared to look for allies and opportunities, whether they're former, mentors or coaches, in unexpected places,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a good thing, right? That's really good. Also, remember that whenever you have an engagement, sometimes I think back. I mean, we probably all. I know I definitely have fallen victim to this. Sometimes I think, looking back on my career, that I was so right on certain subjects, and the way I delivered it was actually like so wrong, in the sense that I took about being fearless. A couple of times I might have been a little too aggressive, but the point is sometimes, realize that you can go to the mat on certain things. Okay. And that's okay. Like if you really believe in something, don't be afraid of standing up. Don't be actually being too a little aggressive or a little assertive, right? Because generally as women, we will even where we're very assertive, we may take people off kilter, right? We may surprise them, but generally that's a good thing. And as you get experience, for example, you will learn how to channel or how to direct that assertiveness, that aggressiveness in the most productive way. When you're younger, we're all supposed to remember things we did when we were past that might be a little cringe now, but that's okay. You're supposed to be doing that when you're 28, maybe not 48 or 58, right? So I would also say, don't worry so much, don't overthink things, right? But also be aware that when you are leading people, you will often leave behind a very productive legacy. And so bear in mind that people will remember. I'm sure you've all had employees that said they remember when, right? You did something for them. And I still remember that. I was talking about a colleague of 35 years ago who first told me about how to manage sales. This was a guy actually, but it was a really profound comment that he made. He laughed. He said, "I can't believe you still remember that." So people remember that your engagement, you have the opportunity to learn from really good leaders, right? And also to be a really good leader. And you could have a profound impact that you would never even imagine. It's all about that legacy thing. And I think as women, we look more to the future, right? Because that nurturing is what helps bring legacy.
So for me, I started my career, and I will say I was a kid who grew up. I was a line leader. I was always a straight A student. I always follow the rules and learned how to be an achiever, which is a lot of us as women. When I started my career, I looked at it as if I am exceptional at my job in doing the work, that will speak enough for itself to sponsor growth. And I had a point, probably about 10 years in my career, where I realized that actually isn't enough. There is a balance of the politics and the professional aptitude that you need to really be building a network, having a sponsor, to your point, Mila, really being able to advocate for yourself and recognize that great work can often be missed if it's not in connection with a wider workforce. So I want to double click on one of each of the things that you said. So Mila, I would love to talk about, you really brought up finding a sponsor is when things really accelerated. Can you talk about how you found a sponsor? How did you ask for that? What did that look like?
Absolutely. The first kind of experience with having a sponsor like that, I did not ask, which is interesting because I recognize now, like a sponsor, I don't think it's not like a mentor where you ask for it, it's more earned. And
Mhm.
so in this case, I had worked with someone for quite a long time. There was a situation where it was just a wild and crazy time where I think it was like within a 48-hour period, 4 levels of leadership above me all disappeared. They moved to a different org, got changed, left, resigned, fired, whatever it was, 4 levels were gone. And our team was left kind of floating in this big corporate world. And I always think there's a opportunity when situations like that happen. There's an opportunity to either step back and be like, "Hey, no one's watching. I'm just going to take a few months and chill out," or there's the opportunity to step forward and really say, "You know what? We need some leadership here. And I am not a leader, but I am not going to let this thing float. What we're doing is really important. Let's run this thing until the levels above us are figured out." So the person who ended up becoming that sponsor for me was the person that I was kind of co-leading this team in this kind of tumultuous time. So it was more just an action and a follow-up of stepping up and demonstrating leadership skills that got that sponsor. Um, which then evolved to the person they sponsored me to and the big role I took. That executive then became my sponsor, and that person sponsored me to the next thing. So I think, it just kind of snowballs as you demonstrate those leadership skills in times when there's a gap and you kind of step forward instead of stepping back.
All right. Mary, you brought up that there's times where we want to kind of almost go fight every battle. How do you pick the right battles to fight and the right ones to say that's not worth our energy? I'm going to focus on this instead.
I think you need to step back and take a hard look at what is the issue at hand, right? I mean, sometimes in the past, and also you have to separate the issue at hand from the people, right? From the environment, right? I will say early in my career, sometimes what really got me going were the people at hand who were so objectionable, right? So sometimes I would, let's say, react because of them more than the issue at hand, right? So I think you have to see, what is the impact, right? How big is the impact, the issue? How large is going to be the impact if you address it or not, right? You see, and then figure out, how long is going to be the impact? Is it affecting my team's ability to have an impact, right? Is it affecting the business at hand, achievement of goals, etc.? And then calibrate your response with those factors in mind, but strip the emotion out of it. I was younger in my career, all right, I was not good. All of you know me. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. So you need to really take that apart. And that's particularly important for women in the business world where most of the people or many people you're going to be dealing with are men. Okay. So many times you got to be very careful about delivery too, because you can be very right, but if your delivery is wrong, they only hear the delivery. Right.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
being very measured, and if your first reaction probably should be almost an underreaction, right? Because you can always write escalate, but you can't go to DEF CON, the first time around, right?
Mhm.
And I learned that over time to basically be sure that the issue and the response, are calibrated to the impact at hand. And again, to your point, sometimes you just got to let certain things go, right?
Melissa, you talked about setting an environment where you felt an incongruency between the values of the environment and who you were, and kind of going through this realization of the values that are important of what you need and how you thrive at work. What are
Mhm.
some of the things that maybe helped you realize that, or if someone is feeling that themselves, what are some of the things you might suggest that they could help them to navigate that?
Yeah, so I had a really kind of illuminating experience a number of years ago with this. I mean, at some point in your life, somebody's going to talk to you about executive presence, right? So this is my executive presence story. And I had just been hired into like a senior role, right? Where I had a big team, a large region. And I was hired onto an all-male leadership team by a guy who, like, a lovely guy. Like, I still really, like him, admire him. He taught me a lot. It was a very good relationship. But one of the first things that he said to me was, you've got to work on your executive presence. So this guy's like, maybe 6'4", kind of like the all-American football player sort of guy. And so was the rest of the leadership team. I mean, every other person there really looked and acted, and they're like him. So I really felt like the odd man out. And it took me a little while to kind of, first of all, like, what is executive presence? What does he mean by that? Like, what does that even mean? And I kind of spun around in my mind for a little while about what that meant. But in the meantime, there was work to be done, right? So our team did what we needed to do. We started, consistently delivering quarter after quarter. We were having a lot of fun while we were doing it. The team was really thriving. Interestingly, other people on other teams started coming to me and asking me for mentorship. And that was kind of a big aha moment for me, and a little bit of a turning point on my leadership journey, because it really helped me. I was like, you know what? There's something here. Like, there's something going right here. So on one hand, I was told, well, you should be more like this. On the other hand, being me and being authentically me and good at my job and confident that I was doing the right things and was good at that job helped me kind of say, I could really lean into who I was as a leader. We're doing something right. I'm doing something right. And it was a bit of a light bulb moment. And so for me, that was like an understanding that my unique abilities and what I brought to the table and, my authentic self was really better than good enough. Right. And I kind of gave myself permission to just be like, I'm not going to worry about this standard, this version of what leadership should look like. And I'm going to do things the way that I know clearly works, and we got the data to prove it. So I guess if my advice would be, I don't like to use the expression lean in because it has connotations to like that the book and the movement, right? But like, lean into who you are and what the unique strengths that you bring, and let that be your compass. Continue to collaborate and invite feedback and all of this stuff, right? But understand that your unique perspective is your competitive differentiator.
Well, it's really being audacious and being comfortable with being authentic in who you are and, unapologetic about it, which is not a bad thing. It's what makes you a unique leader. I had a friend who said her boss told her that her team didn't fear her enough. And she thought, I'm glad they don't fear me. They should want to come to me. I'm supposed to be a partner to them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Katie, I had a similar example where a leader of mine told me that my greatest weakness was that I considered my colleagues and coworkers friends. And I thought, that's actually my greatest strength, because I have so many connections who I can call at the drop of a hat. And because we have that real connection, they will support whatever we need, right? Like, I just thought it was fascinating for someone to think of that strength, which is my true, value, as a weakness. But yeah.
Well, in building trust with a team, especially when I first start to work with them, I always really want to think about connecting with you as a human. Tell me about you. What makes you excited? What's important to you? What motivates you? What do you want to do next? What's growth look like? Just knowing, hey, you love to go to the beach and you love to play basketball on the weekends and pickup games. Great. That's cool to know about you. Because when you can have those kind of connections, your team is much more willing to come to you with the hard stuff. And you can have a very different accelerated conversation in the hard situations when you have that foundational human connection first. We've shared a lot of different experiences. One thing that I would love, we've talked about how women lots of times have self-doubt. We question ourselves. We feel like we have imposter syndrome. Is there any moment for each of you that you had that light bulb moment of, I'm okay. It's great to be authentically me. I'm confident. Thanks for the feedback, but I'm going to lean into who I am.
Well, for me, as all of you know, I spent most of my time working with Latin America, right? So I did a lot of my work in Spanish, So the joke sort of was, I'm a fast-talking New Yorker, and I've been told that I should talk more slowly, And I've tried that. And then somebody asked me once if I was okay because I was talking so slowly. And then when I was doing a presentation in Venezuela years ago, I realized I started talking really fast. They talk faster, and everybody's like, "You're doing great." And so I realized that I was always going to be a fast talker in English or Spanish, and that was going to be okay for the environment that I worked in, and that I shouldn't try to throttle back who I was, right? It might not work everywhere, but for me and in that moment and where I was and who I wanted to be, both as an individual contributor and as a leader, there might always be some things to my detriment. Like I tend to over communicate also in writing, but I always wanted to over communicate so there would not be a lack of clarity rather than under communicate, right? And so I realized that I could often be criticized for being too verbose, either verbally or too fast, but I realized it was going to be okay. And that might be a weakness in certain cases, but I was still going to stick with that, right? And everything was going to be fine. And so now the joke, as you know, from my former team was like, "Oh, Mary speaks Spanish faster than we can understand." But at the end of the day, it's going to be okay.
So, okay, I'll give you my example of kind of maybe one moment when I kind of felt like I was doing the right thing. So I, again, had been managing a team of quite a lot of early talent. And I was, for most of them, either their first or second manager they'd ever had. I managed them for maybe like a year and a half. Then I moved on to a different role. They moved on to different roles. They kind of advanced and grew out of that position to the next thing. But several have come back to me after that and told me how shocked they were that the new manager didn't want to get to know them at all. I used to make everyone give a one-slide presentation to introduce themselves to the team, to the whole team, that everyone introduced. They all found their connections, and the team got really well together, right? One person was absolutely shocked that the manager didn't want to know anything about them, and they're like, all he cares about is hitting the KPI. He doesn't want to know, like, I'm just a number. I'm just a body. I'm not anyone that matters to him. So I feel like hearing that feedback, while it was super disappointing of the other manager, it kind of validated that my approach and my style made people feel heard. That human connection we talked about is everything. And that sometimes when you set the goal of leading with humanity and focused on your values, you're not leading with the goal of hitting the KPI, but because you create this environment and this team where people are motivated and excited to be part of it and eager to work with you, they're going to hit the KPIs as the result instead of as the kind of only one main goal. So I don't know. I feel like that was a real turning point for me, that I'm actually doing something right and something that matters, and that, 10 years down the road, they're going to remember, "Oh yeah, she was a great manager. I really, really liked working for her." So I try to keep that going in everything I do.
Yeah, I'm always kind of surprised when I hear stories like that. Like, to me, I feel like, how do you not know that people want to be seen as humans, right? And so when I hear stories of leaders that only care about the number and just want to bypass that part, it's shocking to me, because they're like, we know this, right? So I think, like, I shared a story about, earlier, about kind of clicking in and going, hey, what makes me is my differentiator. And that's a lesson that I've learned over and over again. And I've had other opportunities since then to be like, I've taken on roles or whatever that haven't been, they're maybe like a strange choice to some, but, I knew what was important to me. And that gets back to that kind of like that values and purpose piece. I just feel like that's the core of our identities. So figuring that out and then living that way authentically as a leader is something that people connect with. And, that's how you become the kind of leader that people actually want to follow. Right. So it's just, that would be my advice to anybody is of course we all need to still manage, right? We need to get the work done. But I think the way that you do that and really align people around a shared vision is that kind of that authenticity piece, right? You don't need to share every detail of your personal life, but like at the end of the day, we're all people, and we really need to be connected. We all know now how important community is, right? So be a leader within your community. Yeah.
I think one of the things that was interesting to me is I remember a point, and I was always the overachiever, as I'd highlighted, very achievement driven. And I had my manager stop me and he'd say, "You're doing too much. You're not going to be effective in trying to do everything. You actually need to take a break, some of these things need to come off of your plate. You're going to be better at doing less great than trying to do everything. And it was a really simple lesson, but it really called out that I can't just rely on trying to do enough and then I would be seen for what I needed to be. So as we wrap here, we've talked about confidence. We've talked about the environment a leader creates. We've talked about that importance of values and how we're working. Any final advice that we'd like to share, women who are struggling with confidence, taking on a new team, trying to find that values alignment in their work, what would you all suggest? So as we wrap here, we've talked about confidence. We've talked about the environment a leader creates. We've talked about that importance of values and how we're working. Any final advice that we'd like to share, women who are struggling with confidence, taking on a new team, trying to find that values alignment in their work, what would you all suggest?
I would say very short and sweet is just dive into opportunities that are going to help stretch you and just trust your abilities. I coach so many people. And so many of them are like, everyone tells me that I'm really great, but I don't believe it. So just trust your abilities, dive in. And real courage is when you act before you even feel like you're ready. So just dive in and do it. I think just not hesitating is kind of the best advice I can give as we close.
And I would come at it like as a leader working with teams, right? And maybe you've got folks that maybe you've got women or younger women or anybody, right, that's could potentially be struggling with confidence. So the things that I would look to do is, first of all, remember that confidence is a multidimensional piece, right, or a multidimensional outcome, I would say. So deconstruct it a bit and try to understand, like, where does that come from? Is it a skills thing? Is it a practice thing, or is as a person that's struggling with an internal talk track that's like holding them back? We're not therapists, so we don't really know, but like just remembering that this is a complex issue and there's no hack, right? There's no way to just like become confident because you did one simple thing. So it's just understanding this and then creating the kind of environments that support people's potential to thrive, right? Because that's how you scale, right? That's how you scale results, is by creating these types of environments. And I think that good leadership, courageous leadership is really grounded in values, not just when things are good, not just like when you have that eagle poster on the wall that says courage, right? But like when things are hard and when you're under fire, right? Not only identifying them, but also being really clear on what the behaviors are that support those values and demonstrate those values, and rewarding them and celebrating them when you see them. Again, that's where trust comes from. Leaders, I think, we said this before, leaders really need to be able to model those and really walk the talk so that people have the freedom and the confidence to do the same, right? So we need to be the ones to remove the friction and the barriers that are in place so that people have the potential to grow their confidence and to really thrive as eventually as leaders themselves.
And then I think finally, when opportunities are presented to you, recognize that many times others will see something in you that you may not yet see in yourself. That is obviously something very good. Sometimes we're so close to ourselves that people, and this is what good leaders are very good at recognizing, that nascent talent that needs some encouragement. So when somebody sees that in you, view that as a good, and so to your point, that's the permission to take that leap, right? Because many times, leaders do not want to see their team members fail, right? So they're going to want to do stretch assignments. So when that's there, recognize that, well, you may not have the confidence, somebody else obviously does in you, or they wouldn't be bringing it to you.
Yeah.
Right? So take that as a little bit of reassurance that you can do it. Somebody else believes you can do it.
Love it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the tremendous advice and wisdom shared from the LeadWell Collective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.